If you had met him on the street, you would have thought he had everything figured out. A steady job, a nice apartment, clothes that fit well, and a face that smiled at all the right moments. But smiles can be practiced, and some people become very good at pretending. His name was David, and at 42 years old, he had mastered the art of looking okay while falling apart on the inside. David worked as an architect in a mid-sized firm in the city. He designed buildings that people described as warm and welcoming, open spaces with lots of natural light, the kind of places where you walked in and immediately felt comfortable. His clients loved him. His co-workers respected him. But if you asked any of them what David did on weekends or who his closest friends were or what made him laugh until his stomach hurt, they would just stare at you blankly, because nobody knew. David made sure of that. He had not always been this way. There was a time when David was the loudest person in every room, the one who told jokes at family dinners, the one who stayed up late playing cards with his younger brother, arguing about sports and music and everything else. Two brothers argue about when they are young and believe they have all the time in the world. His brother's name was Tommy. He was 3 years younger than David, and he had the kind of personality that made strangers feel like old friends. Tommy could talk to anyone. He remembered birthdays. He showed up when people needed help, even when they did not ask. And most importantly, Tommy was the one who had taught David to love music. When they were boys, their grandmother lived with them. She was a small woman with soft hands and a voice that carried melodies like water carries stones, smooth and effortless. Every night before bed, she would hum a tune, a simple lullaby that her own mother had sung to her many years ago. It had no words, or at least none that she remembered, just a gentle rise and fall of notes that felt like being wrapped in something safe. David and Tommy would lie in their beds and listen. And when their grandmother passed away, they kept the melody alive by learning to play it themselves. Tommy on guitar, David on piano. It became their thing, their connection, a thread that held them together through all the changes that come with growing up. But threads can break. And sometimes they break in ways that can never be repaired. 15 years ago, on a cold night in November, David was driving home from a friend's wedding. Tommy was in the passenger seat, half asleep, humming that old lullaby under his breath. The roads were wet. David was tired, but not dangerously so. He had only had one drink hours earlier. He was being careful. He was doing everything right. And then, out of nowhere, a truck ran a red light. The details after that came in fragments. The sound of metal folding, glass shattering like ice, his own voice screaming his brother's name. Then silence. A long, terrible silence that seemed to swallow everything. David woke up in a hospital 3 days later. He had a broken arm and some cuts on his face. Nothing that would not heal. The doctors told him he was lucky. They told him he would make a full recovery. They did not tell him about Tommy. Not right away, but he knew. Somehow, even before the words came, he knew. Tommy had died on impact. He never woke up. He never had a chance. David left the hospital 2 weeks later. He went back to his apartment. He sat on his couch and stared at the wall for what felt like years. And then, slowly, he began to build walls of his own. Not with bricks or stone, but with silence, with distance, with the careful removal of everything that reminded him of his brother. He sold his piano. He deleted every song from his phone. He stopped going to places where live music played. He avoided weddings and parties and anywhere else that melody might sneak up on him without warning. Because every time he heard music, especially that lullaby, he was back in that car. Back in that moment. Back in the silence that followed the crash. His therapist had a word for it. She called it emotional hibernation, a way of shutting down to protect yourself from pain. David called it survival, because that is what it felt like he was barely keeping his head above water, and any extra weight would pull him under for good. The years passed. David worked. He ate. He slept. He went through the motions of a life without actually living it. He dated a few women, but he never let them get close. He would feel something starting to build, a warmth, a connection, and then he would pull away. He would cancel plans. He would stop returning calls. Eventually, they would give up, and David would tell himself it was better this way. Safer. Less chance of anyone getting hurt. His parents worried about him. His mother would call every Sunday, her voice careful and hopeful, asking if he had met anyone nice, if he was taking care of himself, if maybe he wanted to come home for the holidays this year. David would say yes to the easy questions and avoid the hard ones. He never went home. Home had too many memories, too many photographs on the walls, too many echoes of laughter that no longer existed. By the time he turned 40, David had accepted that this was his life now. Quiet, controlled, empty in a way that felt permanent. He had stopped hoping for anything different. He had stopped believing that different was even possible. And then, one rainy evening in October, everything began to change. It started with a work assignment. His firm had been hired to design a new community arts center on the east side of the city. The client was a woman in her 60s who had spent her whole life around musicians and artists. She had very specific ideas about what she wanted, a space that felt alive, a space that celebrated creativity and connection and all the things that made people human. She also had one unusual request. Before David started designing anything, she wanted him to attend a local open mic night, to experience the kind of community she was trying to build, to understand what the art center needed to feel like from the inside out. David almost said no. Open mic nights meant music. Music meant memories. And memories meant pain. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the client looked at him when she made the request. Maybe it was the rain outside his window, tapping against the glass like a question he could not answer. Maybe it was just exhaustion. The kind that comes from running away for so long that you forget what you were running from in the first place. Whatever the reason, he said yes. The venue was called The Weathered Door. It was a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside, the furniture did not match. The string lights flickered. The coffee was strong and slightly burnt. But there was something about it that felt real, unpolished, honest. David found a seat in the back corner, as far from the stage as he could get. He ordered black coffee and pulled out his phone, planning to scroll through emails until enough time had passed that he could leave without seeming rude. Performers came and went, a poet who spoke too fast, a comedian who tried too hard, an older man who played the spoons with surprising skill. David checked his watch more times than he could count. His coffee grew cold, his patience grew thin, and then she walked onto the stage. She was not what he expected. She was not young or flashy or trying to impress anyone. She was somewhere in her late 30s with dark hair that had streaks of silver running through it. She carried an old acoustic guitar, its body scratched and worn from years of use. She moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who had learned that rushing never got you anywhere worth going. She did not introduce herself. She did not explain what she was about to play. She simply sat down, adjusted the microphone, and began. And in that moment, without warning or permission, the walls that David had spent 15 years building began to crack. The woman on stage did not seem to notice the crowd, or maybe she noticed them and simply did not care what they thought. There was something about the way she held herself that suggested she had stopped performing for approval a long time ago. Now she played for different reasons that had nothing to do with applause. She adjusted the guitar on her lap, her fingers finding their positions on the strings without looking. Her eyes stayed focused somewhere in the middle distance, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The room had grown quiet. Even the people at the back who had been whispering through every other performance seemed to understand that this was different. Then she began to play. The first few notes were simple, almost too simple. The kind of melody a child could pick out on a keyboard. But there was weight behind them. Each note hung in the air a moment longer than expected, like it was waiting for something, or someone. David felt his chest tighten. He did not know why. It was just a song. Just another performer at an open mic night in a cafe he would never visit again. He had heard hundreds of songs over the years, even when he tried to avoid them. In grocery stores, in elevators, leaking out of car windows at red lights. He had learned to tune them out, to let them pass through him without leaving a mark. But this one was different. This one was reaching for something buried deep inside him. Something he had spent 15 years trying to forget. The melody shifted slightly. A new phrase emerged. And suddenly David was not in the weathered door anymore. He was 8 years old, lying in bed next to his brother, listening to their grandmother hum them to sleep. He could smell her perfume. He could feel the weight of the blanket she always tucked around them, even in summer when it was too warm. He could hear Tommy's breathing slow down as sleep took him, always faster than it took David. It was the lullaby. The same one, note for note. David's hands began to shake. He set down his coffee cup before he dropped it. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. He wanted to leave. He needed to leave. But his legs would not move. His body had decided to stay, even if his mind was screaming at him to run. The woman kept playing. She added a second layer to the melody now, a gentle counterpoint that wove around the main theme like vines around a tree. Her eyes were closed. Her lips moved slightly, though no words came out. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in whatever memory or emotion the song carried for her. David wondered where she had learned it. He wondered if she knew what it meant. If she had any idea that somewhere in this room a stranger was falling apart because of a tune she probably played without thinking. The song built slowly. It never became loud or dramatic. It stayed soft and tender, the way a hand might rest on a shoulder during hard times. But within that softness was something powerful, something that refused to let go. David thought about Tommy. Not the Tommy from the accident, not the Tommy he had been trying so hard to forget, but the Tommy from before, the Tommy who used to steal the last slice of pizza and blame it on the dog. The Tommy who once drove 4 hours in the middle of the night just to help David move into his first apartment. The Tommy who could never remember the words to any song, but somehow always remembered the melody. Tears were forming in David's eyes. He blinked them back, embarrassed, grateful that the lights were dim and no one was looking at him. He had not cried in years. He had taught himself not to. Crying meant feeling, and feeling meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning in guilt and grief that had no bottom. But here, in this cramped cafe with its mismatched chairs and flickering lights, the tears came anyway. They did not ask permission. They did not wait for him to be ready. They simply arrived, like guests who had been standing outside his door for 15 years, waiting for someone to finally let them in. The song ended. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, scattered at first, then growing into something warm and genuine. The woman opened her eyes and smiled, a small, private smile that suggested the applause was nice but not necessary. She stood, gave a brief nod, and walked off the stage. David stayed frozen in his seat. The next performer was already setting up. Life was moving on. But David could not move with it. He was stuck somewhere between the past and the present, caught in a current he did not know how to escape. He sat there for another 20 minutes, not hearing anything, not seeing anything. His coffee sat untouched. His phone stayed dark in his pocket. When he finally managed to stand, his legs felt unsteady, like he had just stepped off a boat after a long time at sea. He made his way toward the back exit, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but inside his own head. He pushed through the door and found himself in a narrow hallway that led to the alley behind the building. The air was cold and damp. Rain was still falling, lighter now but steady. And there she was. The woman with the guitar was standing near the exit, her instrument case open on the ground as she carefully placed the guitar inside. She looked up when the door opened, her expression curious but not alarmed. David did not know what he was doing. He had not planned to talk to her. He had planned to walk past, get to his car, drive home, and spend the rest of the night trying to forget what had just happened. But his mouth opened before his brain could stop it. "That song," he said. His voice came out rough, like he had not used it in days. "Where did you learn it?" The woman studied him for a moment. She had kind eyes, the kind that seemed to see more than they let on. She did not seem surprised by his question or by the obvious emotion behind it. "It is an old folk melody," she said. "My father used to play it when I was young. I do not even know if it has a name. I just always called it the sleeping song." The sleeping song. That is what Tommy had called it too. When they were teenagers and too old for lullabies, Tommy would still sometimes play it on his guitar late at night. Just messing around, he would say, but David knew better. Tommy played it because it reminded him of their grandmother, of safety, of home. David nodded slowly. He was trying to keep his composure, trying to act like a normal person having a normal conversation. But his hands were still shaking. His eyes were still wet. "My grandmother used to sing it," he said. "A long time ago. I have not heard it in years." The woman closed her guitar case and stood up. She was shorter than he had expected, barely reaching his shoulder. But there was a steadiness to her that made her seem larger, like she was rooted to the ground in a way most people were not. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was such a simple question. The kind of question people ask all the time, without expecting an honest answer. "How are you? Are you okay?" "Fine, thanks." "Good, you?" The words were automatic, meaningless, just sounds that filled the space between strangers. But standing there in that cold hallway, with the rain falling outside and the muffled sound of the next performer drifting through the walls, David found himself telling the truth. "No," he said, "I am not okay. But I think I am starting to understand why." The woman did not look away. She did not offer empty comfort or try to change the subject. She just stood there, present and patient, like she had all the time in the world. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. David did not. He had never wanted to talk about it. Talking meant opening doors he had spent 15 years keeping shut. But something about this woman made him feel like maybe, just maybe, opening those doors would not destroy him the way he had always feared it would. "I do not know," he said honestly. "But I think maybe I need to." She smiled. It was a warm smile, unhurried and undemanding. "There is a diner around the corner," she said. "They have terrible coffee but very good pie. If you want, we could sit for a while." David looked at her. A stranger. A woman he had met 5 minutes ago in a hallway behind a cafe. Every instinct he had was telling him to say no, to go home, to protect himself the way he always had. But for once, he did not listen. "Okay," he said. "I would like that." And together they walked out into the rain. The diner was called Rosie's, though there was no Rosie. The owner was a tired-looking man named Phil, who had bought the place 20 years ago and never bothered to change the sign. The booths were cracked red leather. The menus were sticky. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. But the pie, as promised, was very good. Her name was Clara. She told him this as they slid into a booth near the window, the rain streaking down the glass beside them. She was a music therapist, she explained. She worked with people who were struggling, patients in hospice care, veterans dealing with trauma, children who had seen things no child should ever see. She used music to reach them when words could not. David listened more than he spoke. It had been so long since he had sat across from someone and actually paid attention. Usually, in conversations, he was calculating, figuring out what to say next, planning his exit. But with Clara, he found himself forgetting to plan. He just listened. She had a way of talking that put him at ease. She did not rush. She did not fill every silence with nervous chatter. When she paused, it was because she was thinking, not because she was uncomfortable. David had forgotten that some people were like this. That some people did not treat every conversation like a performance. "So what do you do?" she asked eventually, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "I am an architect," David said. "I design buildings." "What kind of buildings?" "Community spaces, mostly. Libraries, schools, places where people gather." He paused, surprised by his own honesty. "I try to make them feel welcoming, open, the kind of places where you walk in and immediately feel like you belong." Clara nodded slowly. "That is a beautiful thing to do with your life." David shrugged. He had never thought of it that way. To him, it was just work, a way to fill the hours, a reason to get out of bed in the morning, but hearing her say it made him wonder if maybe it was something more. Maybe, without realizing it, he had been trying to create the kind of warmth he no longer allowed himself to feel. They talked for 2 hours that night. Clara told him about her father, a jazz musician who had played in small clubs all over the country before settling down to teach piano lessons in their hometown. He had died 5 years ago, but she still played his guitar at every open mic night. It was her way of keeping him close. David told her about his work, about the Arts Center project that had brought him to the weathered door in the first place. He told her about his apartment, which was clean and organized and completely devoid of personality. He told her about his parents, who called every Sunday and worried about him in ways they never said out loud. He did not tell her about Tommy. Not yet. The words were there, sitting in his chest like stones. But he could not bring himself to lift them. It was too soon, too much. He barely knew this woman. He could not hand her the heaviest thing he carried and expect her to hold it. But Clara seemed to understand. She did not push. She did not ask why his eyes went dark when he mentioned the past. She simply let the conversation flow where it wanted to go, and when it reached a wall, she gently steered it somewhere else. When they finally left the diner, the rain had stopped. The streets were wet and shining under the streetlights. Clara wrote her phone number on a napkin and handed it to him. "In case you ever want to talk again," she said, "or just sit quietly. I am good at both." David took the napkin. He looked at it for a long moment, the numbers slightly smeared from the damp. He could throw it away. He could go home and pretend this night had never happened. He could go back to the safe, silent life he had built for himself. But he did not want to. For the first time in 15 years, he did not want to. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it for more than just the napkin. The following week, David found himself back at the weathered door. He told himself it was for the project. He needed to understand the space, the community, the feeling the client wanted to capture. But he knew the real reason. He was hoping to see her again. Clara was there. She played a different song this time, something upbeat and playful that made the crowd smile. But David noticed that she ended with a few bars of the lullaby, almost like a signature, a quiet reminder of where she came from. Afterward, they went back to Rosie's. Same booth. Same bad coffee, same easy conversation that felt nothing like talking to a stranger. This became their pattern. Every Thursday night, David would show up at the weathered door. He would sit in the back, watching Clara perform, feeling something loosen in his chest each time she played. Then they would walk to the diner together, talking about everything and nothing, building something that David did not have a name for yet. 3 weeks in, Clara asked him about music. "Do you play anything?" she asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. David's hand tightened around his cup. "I used to," he said carefully. "Piano. A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" The question hung in the air between them. David stared at the table, at the scratched surface covered in years of coffee rings and carved initials. He could lie. He could change the subject. He could do what he always did when someone got too close to the truth. But he was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of carrying this weight alone. "My brother and I learned together," he said slowly. "When we were kids. Our grandmother taught us. She used to sing this lullaby every night, and we learned to play it ourselves after she passed." He paused, his throat tightening. "That song you play, the one from the first night, that is the lullaby." Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she did not interrupt. She just waited, giving him space to continue. "My brother's name was Tommy," David said. "He died 15 years ago. Car accident. I was driving." The words came out flat, like he was reading from a script. It was the only way he could say them without breaking. "After that, I stopped playing. I stopped listening to music. I stopped doing a lot of things." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, warm, asking nothing. "I am so sorry," she said quietly. David nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. The tears were coming again, and this time he did not try to stop them. They fell silently, dropping onto the table between them. Clara did not try to fix it. She did not offer advice or platitudes or any of the things people usually said when they did not know what else to say. She just held his hand and let him feel whatever he needed to feel. They sat like that for a long time. The diner emptied around them. Phil wiped down the counter and pretended not to notice the man crying in the corner booth. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the small, quiet breaking that was happening behind the steamed-up windows of Rosie's diner. When David finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen, Clara was still there, still steady, still patient. "Thank you," he said again, "for not running away." Clara smiled. That same warm, unhurried smile he had come to look forward to all week. "People run away from pain because they think it is dangerous," she said. "But pain is not the enemy. It is just a messenger. It is trying to tell you something important. The only question is whether you are ready to listen." David thought about that. He thought about all the years he had spent refusing to listen. Building walls, shutting doors, convincing himself that silence was the same as healing. Maybe it was time to try something different. "I think I might be ready," he said. "I do not know how. But I think I want to try." Clara squeezed his hand. "Then we will figure it out together." And for the first time in 15 years, David believed that maybe he would not have to carry this alone. 3 months passed. Winter arrived, covering the city in a thin layer of frost that made everything look cleaner than it really was. David found himself changing in ways he did not fully understand. He smiled more. He slept better. He even started humming sometimes, catching himself in the middle of a melody before stopping, surprised by the sound of his own voice. Clara had become a constant in his life, not in a loud or demanding way, but in the quiet way that mattered most. She was there on Thursday nights at the weathered door. She was there on Sunday mornings when they started meeting for breakfast at a small cafe near her apartment. She was there in text messages throughout the week, little jokes and observations that made him feel less alone. They had not kissed. They had not talked about what they were to each other. David was not ready for those conversations yet, and Clara never pushed. She seemed to understand that some things could not be rushed. that healing happened on its own schedule, not on anyone else's timeline. But something was shifting between them. David could feel it. A warmth that went beyond friendship. A connection that felt different from anything he had experienced before. He found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she was doing. Looking forward to seeing her in a way that scared him and excited him at the same time. One evening in early February, Clara called him with a request. "I am doing a session tomorrow at the hospice center where I work," she said. "I want you to come with me." David hesitated. He had heard her talk about her work many times. She played music for patients who were dying. She helped them find peace in their final days. It was beautiful and important work, but it also sounded incredibly difficult. He was not sure he was strong enough to witness it. "I do not know," he said. "That sounds intense." "It is," Clara admitted. "But I think it might help you. I think you need to see what music can do. How it can reach people when nothing else can." David was quiet for a long moment. He trusted Clara. He trusted her more than he had trusted anyone in years. If she thought this would help him, maybe she was right. "Okay," he said finally. "I will come." The hospice center was a low brick building surrounded by bare trees. Inside, it smelled like flowers and cleaning products, a combination that was meant to be comforting but felt slightly artificial. Clara led David down a long hallway lined with soft artwork and motivational quotes framed in cheap wood. The patient's name was George. He was 83 years old, a former teacher who had spent his career working with children in low-income neighborhoods. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago, and now he was in the final stages. He rarely spoke. He barely recognized his own family. Most days, he stared at the ceiling or slept, lost somewhere inside his own fading mind. His wife was there when they arrived, a small woman with white hair and tired eyes that had clearly done a lot of crying. Their daughter sat beside her, holding her mother's hand. They both looked exhausted, worn down by months of watching someone they loved slowly disappear. Clara introduced David as a friend who was interested in learning about music therapy. The family nodded politely, but did not really see him. Their attention was on George, on the shallow rise and fall of his chest, on the face that no longer seemed to recognize them. Clara pulled up a chair beside the bed and took out her guitar. She did not make a speech or explain what she was about to do. She simply began to play. The first song was something old and gentle. A standard from the 1940s that George might have danced to in his youth. His eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, unmoving. His hands lay still on the blanket. There was no response. Clara moved on to a hymn, then a folk song, then a simple melody that sounded like something from a children's television show. Still nothing. George remained locked away, unreachable. David watched from the doorway, his heart aching for the family. He could see the hope draining from their faces with each song. They had been through this before. They knew not to expect miracles. But they kept hoping anyway, because that is what love does. It keeps hoping even when hope seems foolish. Then Clara began to play something different. David recognized it immediately, the lullaby, their grandmother's song. The same melody that had shattered him that first night at the weathered door. The first few notes floated through the room, soft and slow. George's wife looked up, a flicker of something crossing her face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. And then George moved. It was small at first, just a twitch of his fingers. Then his head turned slightly toward the sound. His eyes, which had been empty and distant for months, seemed to focus on something. On Clara, on the guitar, on the music filling the room. His lips parted, and he began to hum. It was not perfect. The notes were shaky and weak, barely more than breath. But they were there. The melody was there. Somewhere deep inside his broken mind, George had found the song. His wife burst into tears. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that looked like joy and grief and wonder all mixed together. She grabbed her husband's hand and held it tight, crying and laughing at the same time. "He remembers," she whispered. "Oh my God, he remembers." George kept humming. His eyes found his wife's face, and for just a moment something flickered there. Recognition, connection, love. All the things that the disease had stolen from him came flooding back, carried on the wings of a simple melody. Clara kept playing. She did not stop. She did not look up. She just let the music do what words could not. David stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. He was not crying for George, though the old man's response was beautiful and heartbreaking. He was crying for himself, for Tommy. For all the years he had spent running from something that had the power to heal, music was not just a reminder of loss. It was a bridge, a connection between the living and the dead, between the past and the present, between the people we used to be and the people we are becoming. David had spent 15 years treating it like poison when it had been medicine all along. The song ended. George's humming faded. His eyes grew distant again, the window of clarity slowly closing. But for 3 minutes, he had been present. He had been himself. He had been connected to the people who loved him in a way that nothing else had made possible. His daughter was sobbing now, hugging her mother, both of them saying things David could not hear. Clara quietly packed up her guitar and stepped back, giving the family space. David met her eyes across the room. He did not have words for what he was feeling. The gratitude, the grief, the strange, painful hope that was blooming in his chest like a flower pushing through concrete. Clara walked over to him and took his hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They left the hospice center and walked to her car in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. David stopped in the middle of the parking lot and looked up at the colors, at the beauty that existed even in the middle of so much pain. "I need to tell you something," he said. Clara waited. "I have been blaming myself for Tommy's death for 15 years, David said. "I was driving. I survived. He did not. And I thought that meant I did not deserve to feel anything good ever again. That I had to punish myself by staying numb, by staying silent." He turned to face her. "But watching George today, seeing what music did for him, I realized something. Tommy would not want this for me. He would not want me to spend my whole life hiding from the things we loved. He would want me to live, to feel, to play again." Clara's eyes were wet. "Then maybe it is time to stop punishing yourself." David nodded slowly. The weight on his chest felt lighter than it had in years. Not gone, but lighter, like maybe he could finally carry it without being crushed. "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe it finally is." Spring arrived slowly that year. The frost melted. The trees began to bud. The days grew longer, and the city seemed to wake up from a long sleep. David felt like he was waking up too. After 15 years of winter, something inside him was finally beginning to thaw. He started small. He stopped changing the radio station when certain songs came on. He let himself listen, really listen, to the music playing in coffee shops and grocery stores. Sometimes it hurt. Sometimes a melody would catch him off guard and bring tears to his eyes. But he did not run from it anymore. He let the feelings come, and then he let them go. Clara was patient with him through all of it. She never told him to hurry up or move faster. She never said he should be over it by now. She just walked beside him, steady and calm, like someone who understood that the hardest journeys are the ones we take inside ourselves. One evening in late April, she invited him to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time he had been there. The place was small but warm. filled with books and plants and photographs of people she loved. A worn rug covered the floor. Mismatched furniture filled the living room. Everything looked lived in and comfortable, like a home that had been built over years of small, careful choices. But it was the piano that caught David's attention. It sat against the far wall, an old upright with scratched wood and yellowed keys. It was not beautiful or expensive. It looked like something that had been passed down through generations, carrying stories in every dent and scratch. "That was my father's," Clara said, following his gaze. "He taught me to play on that piano before he ever picked up a guitar. I could never bring myself to get rid of it." David walked toward it slowly, like approaching a wild animal. He had not been this close to a piano in 15 years. His fingers itched, his chest tightened. Every instinct told him to step back, to protect himself, to keep the walls standing. But the walls were already crumbling. They had been crumbling since that first night at the weathered door, when a stranger played a song that unlocked something he thought he had buried forever. "Can I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded. "Take your time." David sat down on the bench. The wood creaked beneath him. He placed his hands on his lap and stared at the keys, afraid to touch them, afraid of what might happen if he did. Clara sat down beside him, close but not touching. "You do not have to play anything," she said gently. "You can just sit here. The piano is not going anywhere." David took a deep breath, then another. He thought about Tommy, about their grandmother, about all the nights they had spent side by side, learning songs and laughing at their mistakes. He thought about the accident, about the silence that followed, about the 15 years he had spent punishing himself for surviving. And then he thought about George, about the way the old man's eyes had lit up when he heard the lullaby, about the 3 minutes of connection that had meant everything to a family that had almost given up hope. Music was not the enemy. It had never been the enemy. It was a gift, a bridge, a way of keeping the people we love alive even when they are gone. David lifted his right hand and pressed a single key, middle C. The note rang out, clear and simple, filling the room. He pressed another key, then another. His fingers moved slowly at first, hesitant and unsure, but they remembered. After 15 years, they still remembered. The melody emerged piece by piece, the lullaby, their grandmother's song, the tune that had brought him and Clara together, that had broken him open and started putting him back together again. David played through tears. He played through the shaking of his hands and the tightness in his chest. He played through 15 years of grief and guilt and silence. The music poured out of him like water from a broken dam, rushing and unstoppable, carrying away everything he had been holding back. Clara did not say a word. She sat beside him, tears streaming down her own face, bearing witness to something sacred. This was not a performance. This was a healing. This was a man finding his way back to himself after years of being lost. When the song ended, David's hands fell to his lap. He sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, feeling like he had just run a marathon. His whole body was trembling. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something that felt like peace. "Tommy would have loved that," Clara said softly. David nodded. His throat was too tight to speak, but he knew she was right. Tommy would have loved it. Tommy would have been proud. They sat together in the quiet, letting the echo of the music fade. Outside, the sun was setting, casting golden light through the windows. Inside, something had shifted, something that could never be undone. 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, David and Clara got married. The ceremony was small. Just close friends and family gathered at the weathered door, the cafe where everything had begun. The owner had closed the place for the day and filled it with candles and flowers. It looked different in the daylight, softer and more magical than David had ever seen it. Clara wore a simple white dress. David wore a suit that he had bought specifically for the occasion, the first nice clothes he had purchased in years. They stood in front of their guests and promised to love each other through whatever came next, through the hard days and the easy ones, through the grief and the joy, through all the music that still remained to be played. When it came time for the first song, they did not hire a band or play a recording. Instead, Clara picked up her father's guitar and David sat down at a piano they had rented for the day. Together, they played the lullaby, the song that had brought them together, the song that had unlocked everything. Their guests did not know the full story behind the melody. Some of them probably thought it was just a pretty tune. But that was okay. Some things did not need to be explained. Some things just needed to be felt. After the ceremony, David's mother found him standing alone near the window. She looked older than he remembered, worn down by years of worrying about a son who had refused to let her in. But today, her eyes were bright. Today, she looked happy. "I am so proud of you," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Tommy would be too." David squeezed her hands. "I know," he said, and for the first time, he actually believed it. That night, after the guests had gone home and the candles had burned down to stubs, David and Clara walked through the empty streets of the city. The air was cool and clean. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like notes on a page of sheet music. "Thank you," David said quietly. Clara looked up at him. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving when I could not see it myself." Clara smiled and leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "You were never broken," she said. "You were just waiting for the right song to remind you who you really are." David thought about that. He thought about all the years he had spent in silence, believing that he did not deserve to feel anything good. He thought about Tommy and their grandmother, and the simple lullaby that had carried him through the darkest time of his life. He had spent 15 years running from music because he thought it would destroy him. But in the end, it was the very thing that saved him. A simple tune, played by a stranger in a crowded cafe, had become the key to unlocking a heart he thought was closed forever. Some people spend their whole lives searching for that kind of second chance. David had found his in the most unexpected place, at the most unexpected time, with a woman who understood that healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about learning to carry it differently. And as they walked home through the quiet streets, David started to hum. The lullaby, their song, the melody that had changed everything. Clara joined in, her voice soft and warm beside him. And together, they walked into whatever came next.